We're back! In case you don't know what I'm talking about, YouTube took down our entire channel this morning, deleted the whole thing, told us it was permanent. We obviously freaked out. We then made a fuss about this on social media. YouTube ended up changing their mind. We still have not received a proper explanation for any of this. An unaccountable corporation based in Silicon Valley took down our entire channel, 40 million views. No explanation, no word. This demonstrates the unaccountable power that YouTube have. I also have to say, it demonstrates the phenomenal support that we have online. We are so appreciative of everyone who tweeted to reinstate Novara. I am absolutely 100% certain we would not have been reinstated in such a short space of time were it not for you guys. We are going to be talking about exactly what happened today and the wider implications. I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm very well, Michael. Thank you for asking. Although it was a rather strange beginning to the day, I have to say. About 10:30, I messaged the Novara Media Slack saying, "Guys, has our entire video channel just disappeared without any warning?" And that's exactly what happened. Quite disturbing.
5 years of our life's work. We are also going to be joined by Ash Sarkar any minute now. We'll be introducing her in a moment. Let's take you through then, step by step, what happened today. If you, as I'm sure you did, tried to go to the Novara Media YouTube channel this morning, this is what you would have seen. This page isn't available. Sorry about that. Try searching for something else. The cheek! Try searching for something else. Oh, what is that about? That happened at the same time that they took down our channel. We received this email from YouTube. Hi Novara Media, we have reviewed your content and found severe or repeated violations of our community guidelines. Because of this, we have removed your channel from YouTube. We know this is probably very upsetting news, but it's our job to make sure that YouTube is a safe place for all. If we think a channel severely violates our policies, we take it down to protect other users on the platform. But if you believe we've made the wrong call, you can appeal this decision. You'll find more information about the policy in question and how to submit an appeal below. Then it says what our policy says. Spam, scams, or commercially deceptive content are not allowed on YouTube. The implication being, of course, that Novara Media produces and publishes spam, scams, or commercially deceptive content. I'll explain what that is in one moment. The rest of the email says how this affects your channel. We have permanently removed your channel from YouTube. Going forward, you won't be able to access, possess, or create any other YouTube channels. I actually we couldn't have created an alternative Novara Media if this decision had held. This would have been it. What you can do next, these are your steps. You can read the guidelines and you can make an appeal. I'll tell you about that appeal process in one moment. So to describe what we had been accused of here, spam, scams, or commercially deceptive content. We're not going to go to the whole guidelines because it's a little bit tedious, but essentially what that's suggesting we did is that we published sort of fake videos where you suggest what you were going to be talking about was two celebrities who've just hooked up, but instead, when someone clicks on your video, they're sent to some website where they can buy dieting pills. That's the kind of thing we were being accused of. So that's commercially deceptive. You're luring people into your video to take them somewhere else unrelated to what the video suggested. As I say, we were really confident we hadn't fallen foul of this. Lots of people ask me, have you been found to have violated the community standards before? Is this a sort of third strike thing? No, we haven't. In fact, we have once, and that was for producing anti-vax content. What had actually happened was we had published a short clip of an anti-vaxxer and then debunked them. In that case, YouTube didn't do anything drastic like remove our channel. They gave us a little flag. We appealed it, and then that was removed. So there were no strikes on our channel. This was incredibly confusing for us. In response to this, we emailed them. We said, well, we'll use this appeal process. Let's try and get our channel back. And this is the reply we get from YouTube. So YouTube say, hello. Thank you for contacting us about your disabled Google account. The Google Accounts team will review your request and be in touch with an update as soon as possible. Most requests take 2 business days to review, but some might take longer. Thanks for your patience. So we're a channel who I've worked out over the past 28 days, we've had 64,000 views a day. That's because of all of your kind support. And we weren't going to get a response for 2 days, potentially more. So they say, we have a Tisky Sour plan for tomorrow night. We had 3 clips that were due to go out today, and we're expected to sit here with this automated response and wait for 2 days or 3 days or 4 days, potentially longer, for someone to say, oh, this is clearly wrong, or for someone to tell us, no, you might not have realized it, but you did breach our community guidelines. We'll talk about what YouTube did next. First of all, what I want to talk about is what we did at this point. So we've been suspended. We've got an unsatisfactory response from YouTube. This was time for us to kick up a fuss. I'm going to introduce Ash Sarkar, who is now ready in the stream. And Ash, I want you to sort of explain, what happened on Twitter today. There was a nice response, wasn't there?
When we found out that our YouTube had been taken down without sufficient explanation and absolutely no warning, we produced a statement and put it out. Now, one of the things which I think has united the left, the right, and the center is this feeling that big tech giants exercise far too much power, unaccountable power. I think that is a feeling which is broadly shared across the political spectrum. And so after we put out a statement, we got a lot of support from the left, as you might imagine. We had some very kind offers from left-wing Labour MPs offering to take this further on our behalf, which we really appreciated, but also support from people who might not necessarily agree with us. David Davis being one person, Julia Hartley-Brewer, Lawrence Fox, Freddie Sayers from Unheard, Fraser Nelson messaged me, as well as, of course, a huge outpouring of support and outrage from our dedicated subscribers. And one of the things which I think then happened was that there was then pressure being put on YouTube, both from the public and then also from people who are a bit better connected than either me or you, Michael, who are able to put questions to the YouTube press team directly. I know a couple of journalists who did that, and also raise it with various contacts that they had within the organization. Now, I'm not saying that is how things should be done. All right. I think particularly if you are running a journalistic outfit on YouTube, there should be a pretty standard way to get these things resolved as quickly as possible, and better yet, a process which would ensure that such mistakes couldn't happen in the first place. But I think that it was that outpouring of support, that outrage, and then also those quite difficult questions being put directly to staff within YouTube itself that resulted in our channel being reinstated a bit quicker than those 2 business days that had been quoted to us earlier in the day.
So let's now look at how YouTube responded. So as you'll know, because we're speaking to you now, we were reinstated. That happened at 1:30. We were having an all hands on deck meeting, working out how we could put pressure on YouTube to reinstate us when it happened. And this is the message from them. Hi, Novara Media. We're pleased to let you know that we've recently reviewed your YouTube account, and after taking another look, we can confirm that it is not in violation of our terms of service. We have lifted the suspension of your account, and it is once again active and operational. We'd like to thank you for your patience while we reviewed this case. Our goal is to make sure content doesn't violate our community guidelines so that YouTube can be a safe place for all, and sometimes we make mistakes trying to get it right. We hope you understand, and we're sorry for any inconvenience or frustration this has caused. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us here. Now, what you'll note there, an apology, very much appreciated. We're sorry for this mistake. What's not there is any explanation as to what has happened. As I said, we've got a channel, 160,000 followers, 64,000 people watching it a day. If you just take the entire channel off the internet, that's a big deal. We deserve an explanation for what has happened there, especially as we want to be reassured this isn't going to happen again. We want to be reassured that whatever person complained to YouTube or whatever staff member decided they had a vendetta against us or whoever accidentally hit the red button, that's not going to happen again. No explanation. There was then also this thread. So this is from the Team YouTube on Twitter, responding to one of our statements on Twitter. So Team YouTube said, With 400 hours of video uploaded every minute to YouTube, we count on our community members to know our community guidelines and to flag content they believe violates them. We review all flagged content quickly, and if we find that a video does violate the guidelines, we remove it. We also have a team that is dedicated to identifying and removing spam from YouTube. Occasionally, a video flagged by users or identified by our spam team is mistakenly taken down. When this is brought to our attention, we review the content and take appropriate action, including restoring videos or channels that had been removed. Aaron, I want to bring you in at this point. What did you make of these statements from YouTube that say, "Oh, honest mistake, our spam bots and our people in the spam team, they identified this, took down your entire channel without any warning, but now we've realized it's a mistake." What do you make of those responses?
There's a few things, Michael. If you go back to the communications you just examined, the first one is that in the initial communication from YouTube, they don't mention suspension. They say your channel has been removed. It's only in the subsequent communication where we're allowed back in that it's called a suspension. So it was apparently a suspension, but it's only retrospectively called that. Then tying that back into the Twitter thread you just showed there, that repeatedly talks about a video. If a video has issues, if it's at odds with our guidelines, if a video does X, if a video does Y, Z, they didn't get rid of a video, Michael. They got rid of a channel. A bit different. If there's a misunderstanding over a single piece of content, explicable, like they say, 400 hours of content uploaded all the time, it happens. However, this is a channel with 166,000 subscribers, 1.8 million views in the last 28 days. We can use the YouTube space down in London. They say in that communication, we have, respect for community members, and they help us, sift bad content from good. Well, what about your creators? What about your creators? The first communication we get from them is literally the minute they pull the plug on the channel. Where's the communication? And look, you in particular, Michael, but also Fox, the whole team here at Novara Media, we've worked with YouTube for years. We know their processes, their protocol. What we saw today was completely at odds with anything we've ever seen from YouTube, which is strange. Now, I'm not going to say why that happened. The explanation needs to come from them. But this wasn't, I don't think, the result of, a single person complaining in an automated process, because that's simply not how what proceeded to happen happens. I think there's a bigger explanation at play here, and we have to hear what it was.
Some super chats. We're getting loads of those. Thank you so much for your super chats and for all of your solidarity today. JM with 42 quid says 42 thumbs down to have 42 quid. I love it when people play this game. F the haters and anyone trying to silence great media. Thank you so much. That's incredibly kind. Patrick Mannion and John Sankey both with 20 quid. Andy Smart, 25 quid. Abolish Silicon Valley. We're going to address how this means we should relate to Silicon Valley on this stream. Do not worry. Joseph Bates with a fiver. Great, you're back. Was it just me, or did it feel like right-wingers were more supportive than centrists, Labour MPs, not on the left? I would say let's go on to that later. Let's go on to that right now, though, actually. Ash, what do you think of that particular point? Did you feel like right-wingers were more supportive than centrists when this happened today?
From what I could see, yeah. That was the case. So you did have people, like I said, Julie Hartley-Brewer, Lawrence Fox, people who do not share our politics at all. And normally I wouldn't even call it having a debate, right? Like normally we are at each other's throats on social media, on our broadcasts all the time. Now, I think the reason why there was that element of rallying around is because these people really do market themselves as free speech absolutists. And so this is a real opportunity to demonstrate the, not continuity, but just the consistency of that viewpoint, right? So if they can stand up for Novara Media, it means that their general worldview of free speech absolutism is upheld. Now, I'm not saying there's anything cynical about that at all. It was support which was greatly appreciated. I think the fact that we got so much support from across the political spectrum really did help. And I think that there was a lot of silence from certain centrists and, those bits of the Labour Party who maybe have felt like they've been under the heat a bit, under the laser eyes of one Mr. Michael Walker and Tiski Sauer, who were strategically silent during that time, as well as, many other centrist columnists, particularly those at the Times, I might say. So yeah, I do think that there was a lot more support coming from the right on this, though I think that is because of, that kind of free speech absolutism there. And I think that what's really important as we come out of having, just narrowly escaped the permanent removal of our channel, we should talk about both the protection of free speech and why that's important, but also what makes our position different from theirs, right? We're not free speech absolutists. We do believe in a regulated media environment, particularly when it comes to, corporate media, the big boys like Rupert Murdoch and Viscount Rothermere and, the Barclay brothers. And so we should also talk about what makes our view of regulation different and why that includes big, unaccountable tech giants like Google.
So we're going to address.
Sorry, I have a cat wearing the cone of shame who is waking up from his anesthetic and he is very hyper. He's just happy that we're back.
Well, I'm glad he's hyper. I was worried he'd be a bit low today. So that's a relief. We'll address the cancel culture question in a moment. I should mention there were some people who were sort of like, centrist liberals who did come out to support us, which was encouraging. Robert Shrimsley of the Financial Times, definitely someone with very, very different politics, who came out and said this was a terrible decision. I saw that was retweeted by Lucy Fisher at the Telegraph. Also not a free speech absolutely. So there was some support from all different parts of the political spectrum, but I did also notice that it did seem to be people on that sort of free speech right wing side who did. And Ash, I think, has explained very well why. A couple more comments. Anna McLeod with a $5. Hope this YouTube mistake will prove to be a funding boost to help Novara become too big to fail. I really agree with that comment. We've been talking about this because, today actually has demonstrated how much widespread support we have. I actually feel like it's, in a way, I feel reassured today because what I think Novara Media has demonstrated is that it would, if someone at YouTube HQ wants to get rid of us for some reason, it's actually going to be quite difficult for them. That, of course, is possible because we have managed to build, a sustainable, impressive organisation, which is thanks to all of your support. So thank you so much for that. Nicola Curtin, a $5. I think YouTube were afraid of losing a lot of advertising revenue because many very powerful voices speaking out against this. There are a few more super chats there. We'll be going to all of those throughout the show. Aaron, obviously this tells us, about the unaccountability of tech power. This decision was made. Well, we don't know where this decision was made. We don't know who it was made by, and we don't know why it was made. But it was, for us at least, a very, very consequential decision. And if we hadn't, rallied around people on social media, it could have been much more severe. What does this tell us about the power of YouTube and the power of Silicon Valley?
An extraordinary amount, Michael, because there's a few points to sort of bear in mind here. Firstly, not all of our revenue comes from YouTube. Actually, a significant amount of our revenue doesn't come from YouTube. But if most of it did, and of course it does for many channels with large numbers of subscribers, with advertising or super chats, we wouldn't have any revenue. We would have lost the revenue by which we can create the organization and pay people. Fortunately, we don't operate like that, but there are other channels which do. And I don't think this is acceptable that you can cut off the revenue stream for a media outlet where they potentially can't pay the bills, can't pay their staff, and you don't give an explanation. I find it extraordinary there's not more due process around that. Equally, I think if we'd been a bit younger, 3 or 4 years ago, would we have been able to withstand this? Probably not. And what does that say? It means that you get an apology from YouTube if you have more than 100,000 followers, if you have some powerful people in the media that follow you. Does that strike you as fair? And so this is why, countries have media regulators, Michael. This is why you have laws around the media so that when transgressions are made or when people incite violence, then they can be dealt with. But that shouldn't be at the discretion of some people in Silicon Valley. Because right now, the real and terrifying situation globally is that 2 or 3 companies, effectively, Amazon, Facebook, YouTube, have a monopoly over what gets published or not. Great tweet from Vincent Bevins, friend of the show, friend of yours. I saw him retweet you as well today, Michael, who basically said, I imagine a majority of the world's leaders could be removed if Google and Facebook wanted to get rid of them. Maybe not, the leading lights, but certainly in the global south. And dystopias were written about governments with this kind of power 40, 50 years ago. Well, guess what? Corporations have it now. And those corporations are immeasurably more powerful than the governments predicted by George Orwell or by Aldous Huxley. Immeasurably more powerful, Michael. Amazon, like I say, Google, Facebook, exercise discretion over what can be published in literally hundreds of countries. Remarkable. And we clearly, as I'm sure we'll talk about later on the show, we clearly have to say enough is enough. That is not acceptable. And that's not a left-right centrist issue. This is about a free society requires authorities beyond private businesses determining who can publish and who can't. That is something that is wholly new, and we should absolutely reject and push back against.
I want to bring in Ash now, and I do want to address this cancel culture question directly. So Ash, yeah, you kick us off. Was this were we a victim of cancel culture today?
Well, look, until we have sufficient explanation for what happened, we simply don't know. We simply don't know whether this was a particularly shonky process that they have internally. It was one person's fuck up, which doesn't excuse YouTube. Then you've got to ask yourself, well, why aren't these processes more robust, considering YouTube and Facebook have such a huge amount of control over our communications infrastructure in the public sphere? Or was there something politically motivated here? It doesn't. How do I put this? We have had a video demonetized before when it featured the topic of Julian Assange, and we also live streamed the Belmarsh Tribunal just a week ago. So I think that potentially there is room to talk about the role of political interference. I don't have any direct evidence of that. And the reason why I don't have any direct evidence of that is because YouTube have failed to explain anything in detail or in any way which makes this process transparent. So I can't say whether or not we were a victim of cancel culture. We also don't know whether vexatious complaints played a role in our flirtation with being permanently deleted. And again, if vexatious complaints did play a role in it, well, then you've got to ask, well, why is YouTube's internal processes for dealing with them so flawed? It's quite obvious that we're not a commercially deceptive or spamming or scamming organization, mostly because we don't really offer a commercial service. People can voluntarily donate to us if they want to. And if they don't want to, they can still access all of our services. There's not a scam. It's not a pyramid scheme. We're not, promising an Avon lady who's never going to turn up. So it would just a tiny bit of critical thinking would tell you that this would be an inappropriate complaint to lodge against us. But there's just a couple of other things that I very briefly want to touch on. And one is this question of, well, how do we regulate our media environment? I am very proud that Novara media are regulated by Impress rather than Ipso. So for those of you who don't understand the difference between those things, don't worry, I didn't either. Impress is the only independent press regulator, the only press regulator which has as part of its guidelines the recommendations from the Leveson inquiry. Now, the reason why we are regulated by Impress and not Ipso is because we looked at the Leveson inquiry. We saw the way in which, Rupert Murdoch's news empire conducted itself around the time of the phone hacking scandal and said, no, we want to be part of making media better. So I don't think that we should, follow down this road of being, free speech absolutists, which essentially is carte blanche for corporate media and privatized media. The thing that we need to talk about are means of democratic oversight of media in a way which also includes these tech giants. Because whether we like it or not, and, I don't like it, the majority of our communications infrastructure is owned and controlled by a handful of companies. Look what happens when Facebook goes down. It's not just Facebook that goes down, it's WhatsApp, it's Instagram, it's all of these platforms that people really rely on, not just in terms of, posting, but communicating with their families, with their friends, and with their loved ones. If you want to talk about the role that Google has on shaping the public sphere, it's an enormous amount of control. So we can either say, well, it's up to private corporations to make sure that that infrastructure is robust, that the processes are fair, and we are absolutely going to do nothing about that. Or we can say, well, these are things which have become public utilities. They've become central to the functioning of public life. They've become central to the functioning of democratic life. And as such, they need to be subject to some kind of democratic oversight. And that's what I think is really important, to place this within a context of, regulating the media and the tech environment for the purposes of the public good.
Let's go to some more comments. The Yapogo with £100. Thank you. Very, very kind. This is utterly appalling. If this had stood, it would have been one of the most serious attacks on our democracy in recent years. A strong chance this might be related to Novara's heroic coverage of the Assange situation. As I said, we are not in a position to know the answer to that, but I think Ash has pointed out why it's not implausible that's the case. I do, by the way, recommend you watch the Belmarsh Tribunal, which we streamed. Lots of really, really important speakers. Graham Reed with 25 quid. Solidarity Novara Media. What happened to the ever brilliant video on bias in the BBC chaired by Ash? Am I imagining this, or was it quietly removed?
I would need a bit more info on which one it was. We've obviously talked about the BBC an awful lot, so I'd need to know which video you're talking about.
We'll look into that. Sam Corsaran with a tenner. Thank you very much. Novara 1, YouTube nil. So glad you're back up and running. Keep fighting the good fight, guys. And Ali with 20 quid. Thank you so much. This was a warning shot. Next, they will remove you for days. May need to find another platform. I will continue supporting you now more than ever. Solidarity with Novara Media, as always. We'll come back to that precise point you've made there. Andy Thomas, Solidarity, guys. Daniel Rhymes. Honestly, the messages sound so template and algorithm sent. It wouldn't surprise me if the algorithm took it down. Tech giants are too reliant on them. It's plausible. I suppose I would be surprised if an algorithm can delete an entire channel, because also it should be quite easy. It should be quite easy to train an algorithm to not do that to channels with 160,000 subscribers. Because obviously, yeah, it might be the case that there are thousands of channels launched every day which are intended to just scam people, to sort of like find gaps in sort of YouTube's regulatory system. But they don't have 160,000 followers, right? It should be easy to teach an algorithm how not to take down media organizations. So I would assume that a person made this decision, but again, we don't know because we haven't been given any explanation. Oliver Kant with a 10. Support all left media. Trash Future, Corner Spatty, True and On, Owen Jones, Antifada, Tribune Magazine. Well, there's your problem. The world transformed, etc. Everyone list more and share. Very well put. Do support all left media. We've got lots of support from all of our colleagues in other progressive platforms across the UK and the US. We were on Owen Jones' show earlier. Aaron, is it time? There was a question there. Is it time to leave YouTube? Obviously, this show is streaming on YouTube. We haven't left YouTube yet. Some people will suggest this should be an excuse to go and build an alternative platform.
On to the previous question about cancel culture, if that's all right.
Do that first. Yes, please do.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Look, cancel culture and censorship aren't this.
I have all the time in the world.
Apologise, will be quick. Oh, fantastic. Cancel culture and censorship aren't the same thing. Cancel culture is quite a new phenomenon. I think it does exist. It's when, for instance, somebody gets a new job. Jess Brammer at the top of the BBC, and people find a tweet from 10 years ago or an article from 5 years ago, and they say she shouldn't have the job because of this. Or actually, Michael Walker is a terrible human being because he tweeted this 10 years ago, or he said this thing 8 years ago. You're cancelled. Okay. Now, there's clearly some overlap between cancel culture, which is quite new. It's kind of contingent on this new digital environment we're all finding our way through, and censorship. But censorship has always existed. What happened today was censorship, arguably. If it wasn't a mistake, again, we don't really know, but it could well be censorship. And that's always existed. 100 years ago, you would be, or even let's go back more recently, 20, 30 years ago, you'd be blacklisted from writing from a newspaper. The point was, Michael, you could go and write for another one. You being unable to write in one publication didn't disqualify you from participating meaningfully in the public sphere. What we're now experiencing with YouTube, Facebook, is something quite different, Michael, because they're not like a newspaper, they're a monopoly. The point of Facebook, the value of Facebook, is that there's one Facebook. Everybody's there. The point of YouTube is that there's one YouTube. Everybody's videos are there. And so this is wholly different. Cancel culture, yes, it exists. It's a thing. Censorship, somewhat distinct and increasingly problematic in a world of platforms. It's always existed, but you could always go somewhere else. There was an element of competition between media outlets. Now, I'm not saying 20, 30 years ago with Rupert Murdoch, everything was hunky-dory at the Sun newspaper in the 1980s. I'm not saying that. But we're moving to something quite new and innovative, where, like I said earlier, 2 or 3 companies effectively exercise a monopoly over the global media conversation. Quite remarkable. And this is only accelerating, and it's only going to get worse. So we need a grown-up conversation around media censorship and monopolies. And this idea of, oh, well, you said cancel culture doesn't exist. You've been cancelled. Not the same thing. Censorship is age-old, but in the 21st century, more relevant than ever.
We've got a really interesting question I want to take on as well. Andy Shaw, how do we on the left call for more oversight and tech censorship without appearing to be making the same arguments that the right are about tech censorship? What I'm kind of interpreting that question as being about is, are we now on the same side as people who say YouTube should never take anything down, including, say, for example, Alex Jones's channel? The left are against corporate power. We're against corporate power. We don't think corporations should be able to make unaccountable decisions about what can and cannot be said in what are, inescapable public spheres. You can't just say, oh, well, YouTube's just a private company, we'll go work on some other video channel. No, YouTube is where the people are. If you kick us off YouTube, that is something you should, you need to be accountable for those decisions. So the left is against tech power. The left isn't against regulation. So it's never been the case that the left hate regulation. And in, my ideal media environment, there would be some democratically controlled regulator that would mean that if you're putting out misinformation about vaccines, implanting chips that control you via Bill Gates, right, then my ideal regulator would probably, definitely take your video down. It might take your channel down. I'm not sure if you did it over and over again. So I don't think this dichotomy between either you're in the pocket of YouTube and these Silicon Valley tech giants, or you have to be a free speech absolutist. I think it's a bit of a false dichotomy. I'm in favor of regulation, but I'm in favor of regulation which is controlled democratically by democratic bodies and in an incredibly transparent and accountable way. That is the opposite of what has happened here. Ash, do you want to comment again on this sort of cancel culture question, or should we go on to sort of alternatives to YouTube?
No, I'd like to talk about cancel culture because I agree with Aaron. I think that these are 2 discussions which have been muddied up. I think what cancel culture refers to are the informal mechanisms of disagreement and social condemnation, which are designed or have the unintended consequence of limiting somebody's access to a platform, whether that is a role in public life, like in the media or having a Twitter account, or whether it's something like having a job. Now, I think that, as you said earlier on the Owen Jones show, this is vastly overblown. So one of the problems is, yes, there has been a change within the culture, which has tended to focus on whether or not we're having a discussion rather than who's saying what and who wins that discussion. That is a change in the culture. Social media has, I think, created this quite nebulous terrain where we don't know the beginning and the end between something that somebody said and how much of an impact it should have on the rest of their lives. Now, I think that this is something which there aren't straightforward answers to. I would like to think that, well, nothing I say on social media should have an impact on my real life. Would I think the same if somebody who, I don't know, works with children came out with pro-pedophile sentiment, or if somebody said that they encourage, violent jihad, or if somebody said, hey, I'm a neo-Nazi? Well, no, I wouldn't, right? So we all agree that there should be some limits, and we're in the process of socially negotiating what those limits are. So I do think that cancel culture does refer to a change in the culture. But what I think has happened is that those who have powerful platforms, because maybe they work in the media or perhaps they're a politician, one of the things that they've done is that they've taken all kinds of condemnation, criticism, and expressions of disdain and said all of this is cancel culture. Anytime I'm being criticized, it is a cancellation. That is what's happening. And I think that there are a lot of bad faith discussions around this. One of the things that I think is quite gross is that you have a view of free speech which says, well, you can say what you like apart from I shouldn't have the job that I do. Now, I think that is a curtailment of free speech, but that is different and distinct from censorship. Now, again, we're not anti-censorship absolutists. I think it's fair enough to have rules governing incitement, racism, misogyny, threats of violence, so on and so forth on public platforms. I think that's fair enough. I think that's a good thing. We have to recognize that the amplification of speech through social media or publication does something which is unique, which is the potential to incite either through an explicit call to action or through implicit calls to action, what we would call the stochastic effects of speech acts and publication. I think we need to recognize that. We need to take that responsibility seriously. And I actually think that media organizations on social media, individual journalists on social media should be held to much higher standards than they are. And that's why I said I'm very, very proud that we're regulated by Impress. That doesn't mean that the people who should decide those standards are these huge tech corporations who operate in a completely unaccountable way, whose processes are opaque to the rest of us. They operate within this kind of black box. And then whenever you have a problem with social media, whether that is the spread of misinformation or whether it's the problem of online threats, harassment, violence, racism, that you go, well, the answer to this is to concentrate more power in the hands of the tech giants. I think that that is a very dangerous place for our politics to be. And unfortunately, it's being driven there by, even center left and liberal MPs who have been responding to this, barbaric and brutal murder of David Amos by going, let's put more power in the hands of tech monopolies. I think that is really reckless, and it's ducking, I think, the question of what democratic accountability and oversight of these platforms should look like.
Let's go to some more super chats. Alex Mills, try Twitch. It's huge right now, and socialists like Hassan Abi have done really well on it. Maybe stream on both YouTube and Twitch. Y'all should have Hassan on, by the way. Tiski Sour, we do actually stream both on YouTube and Twitch. We're going to start trying to make some, native Twitch content. At the moment, we just put some of our YouTube content on Twitch, but we'll hopefully move beyond that. I would love to have Hassan Abi on Novara Media. If you want to encourage Hassan to come on, please do. I think he's quite a busy guy. You can follow our Twitch on twitch.tv/Novara Media. Patrick Ramoon says, it's far too easy to take a YouTuber down with mass reporting. I've seen it happen to apolitical creators too. Solidarity from Ireland and end YouTube's poor treatment of its creators. 100% concur. Christian Delacroix, glad you guys are back. Watch you all the time. I would love to see a discussion between Ash and Brianna Joy Gray. That's Bernie Sanders' press secretary. For his campaign would be a really interesting discussion. I would love to see that too. We should try and make that happen. Fresh Dax, stream on PeerTube. Big open source software. Information wants to be free, so does software. Open source is basically communism for software. And Wizard Akar says, I suspect this is a bigger story than you realize and might become much bigger. Who has the power to delete a channel? What's the precedent? I want to go back to that question I asked you before. I'm glad we stayed longer on cancel culture because it was very interesting. But Aaron, these questions about should we be leaving YouTube and sort of migrating to PeerTube, we've just been told about, or a completely different independent platform. What's your take on that? Are we too reliant on YouTube?
Well, one of the problems, of course, if you go to Twitch, is that it's owned by Amazon. And that goes back to my previous point about, realistically, if you're trying to evade the big monopolies, Facebook, Amazon, Google, you're going to really struggle. And that's not going away anytime soon. Of course, the reason why we do participate on these platforms, Michael, is it allows us to reach a very large audience. We won't be able to do that on these smaller platforms, even though the technology, politically speaking, is far closer to our beliefs. We want to take those beliefs and our arguments and our ideas to as large an audience as possible. So there's something of a contradiction there. I think in the short term, the left can do three things. Firstly, it has to defend free speech, and it has to defend media freedoms. In other words, it can't allow the right to own this as a subject, which is something which has happened in the last 4 to 5 years, completely at odds actually with the history of left-wing politics. Rosa Luxemburg has quote after quote after quote of media freedom and freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. And that's something where the left has been really weak. So the first is defend freedom of speech robustly, don't allow the right to own it. Secondly, I think every time this kind of infringement on our freedoms happens from the likes of YouTube, Amazon, etc., we need to push back and say that's not acceptable. But it doesn't just apply to the tech giants, Michael. It also, I think, has to be part of a broader defense of due process and the rule of law and fairness. Because what I've repeatedly seen is, I hate to say this, liberals, centrists, not always, some liberals have defended us today, but liberals and centrists who say, oh, well, maybe Sinn Féin shouldn't be able to form a government because they won't adopt the IHRA. Or maybe this person shouldn't be allowed on television because they've said something which you disagree with, which happened repeatedly with the left in regards to the IHRA. For instance, Aaron Bastani, what's he doing on Sky News? He said that Labour shouldn't adopt the IHRA. Anyone who's serious about the left winning the debates in the 21st century has to recognize how utterly toxic that mindset is, how it is completely at odds with the values and the policies and the politics that we try to advance. So firstly, defend freedom of speech. Secondly, that has to be manifest in certain actions and responses to things, day to day, week to week, month to month. Excuse me. Finally, thirdly and finally, my apologies to people listening with earphones and headphones. Thirdly and finally, Michael, we on the left need to determine a campaign around how democratically elected politicians and media regulators interface with the likes of YouTube, Facebook, Amazon, and actually hold them accountable. Because we can't just keep on having these ad hoc campaigns of defend these guys, reinstate these guys. We need regulations in this country which clearly state when the likes of YouTube can and cannot ban somebody. That should not be up to Silicon Valley. It should be up to democratically elected holders of public office. The fact it isn't is a very, very, very new state of affairs. So the idea that it's a whole new problem and we have no solutions to hand, ridiculous. We've had media regulators and we've had politicians involving themselves in these debates for a century. Not always for good, sometimes for ill, but it's obviously a better foundation than what we're moving towards. So yes, we need those campaigns, the ad hoc ones. Yes, we need the values. But I think fundamentally now, we need to say the next time there's a Labour government in Britain, for instance, on the left, we want to talk about media reform. We want to talk about how we're going to have a regulator effectively dealing with the newspapers, of course. But I think we also have to talk about platform capitalism and censorship on smaller creators. Has to be part of that media reform conversation, which, of course, in Britain has been in circulation now for more than a decade, with the Leveson inquiry and Murdoch and so on. This is all, one part of the same whole. My worry is, Michael, talk radio was chucked off YouTube, somewhat like ourselves. They came back in because they're a big business. They've got Murdoch. They've got lawyers. We managed to get back in. We've got lots of supporters. But that's clearly not a universalizable way of conducting this. We need far fairer processes. And so we can't let this go. So if people think, Novara Media are running an hour conversation about themselves being censored from YouTube on YouTube, how stupid is that? No, there's a far bigger debate at play here. And it's only going to get more pertinent over the coming years and decades.
I agree with you there on the question of migrating elsewhere. I want Novara Media to be a platform that reaches people who don't already agree with our politics. That's possible because we've got our really valued regular viewers watching the videos, liking the videos, getting them up in the algorithm. That means more people see them. If what we did instead was direct all of our existing fans to a different app, I think that would really hinder our growth. So I'm very much in favour of sticking with YouTube for now, but demanding they do better. I just want to ask you to clarify something, Aaron, just because I want to know if there's a disagreement between us three, because that's always useful and can be interesting for the audience, or if we're just putting different emphases on things. So you've talked there about the left have to defend free speech. Ash sort of mentioned that she agrees with limits to free speech. I mean, is that a disagreement, or do you want to clarify what you meant there?
Well, so for instance, we were talking about censorship earlier on, and Can I give any examples where somebody should have been censored? And I certainly can. Tommy Robinson on Facebook, his account was removed because he was engaging in incitement. He was actively jeopardizing the safety of a young person who he was maliciously lying about. And so there's a textbook example of somebody who's behaving in such an egregious way, not just at odds with the public interest, but actually someone's safety, where you could say, look, this is pretty obvious. We're going to take their platform away from them because they're engaging in incitement. Or he was potentially compromising court cases which were ongoing, et cetera, et cetera. I think that doesn't fall under free speech. Hey, look, you can have your opinions, but you don't have a right to broadcast them to a mass audience which further jeopardize that person or undermine that case. Very different things. I think probably on the nuances on particular cases, we probably do disagree. But I think in the general, I think we're of a mind on that, aren't we, Michael? And I do think it's important to say that freedom of speech for an individual is very different for freedom of speech for, Times newspaper. If one person says something stupid which undermines somebody's safety, of course it's unacceptable. When you've got a newspaper doing it with an audience of millions of people on an industrial scale, clearly we need even greater accountability for that. And actually in this country, we're moving to a situation, called on by much of the political class, I must say, after the last week, where we leave the likes of the Murdoch press alone, we leave the likes of the powerful media oligarchs alone, and we focus on some, anonymous Twitter account with a username which sounds like a Wi-Fi password. Priorities all wrong.
No, I do. I mean, I think that's very reasonable. I think it is also worth saying, because how do you end up not being lumped with the right in this? I think there will be situations, and there should be, where we say we might disagree with what you've said, you right winger who hates socialism, but you have every right to say that. There will be other situations where it's you right winger just incited violence against one specific person, or you right winger spread misinformation about vaccines turning you into animals or killing you or whatever, and you don't. So we need to be able to have this conversation where it's not just, if you agree with me, it's okay. If you don't agree with me, you're causing untold damage, and therefore you have no right to be able to speak. Do you want to come back in on this, Ash?
Yeah. I really would like to. So I think that the really core example here is Donald Trump and the suspension of his Twitter account. Now, this was something where at the time I was like, I don't think that this is something which should be uncritically celebrated. I recognize that how Donald Trump was using his Twitter as the president of the United States had uniquely high stakes. So what it meant for him to disparage the integrity of an election, or to put out tweets which could be seen as inciting the attack on the Capitol that we saw on the 6th of January, that there are unique responsibilities that Twitter has as a platform, because by keeping these tweets up, by keeping this account intact, it could have gotten many people killed. In fact, people did get killed on January the 6th. So while I recognize that this is a tension, and that maybe this was correct in this case because of the very specific circumstances, this is not a power that I want to be within the remit of big tech companies, where they've got to make the call on the day about which elected representative is okay to keep and which one isn't. Because I don't want to see that power being used against a democratically elected left-winger or democratically elected anybody who, say, isn't doing what Donald Trump did, which is disparage the integrity of an election results in such a way which was likely to get people killed. But a politician who is taking a stand against the interests of capital, for that to be an unrestricted power in the hands of tech giants, I think is very, very dangerous indeed. So even when it is something where I go, well, this decision ultimately fell on the right side, you then have to take a step back and go, but this shouldn't have been their decision to make in the first place. And so we should really think about how and why that was allowed to be the case. And then secondly, I guess I just want to sort of talk about, free speech. And maybe there's an element of context to free speech. I don't lecture anymore, but I was for the past 4 years. I was lecturing at the Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam, bang, bang. And what my obligations were as a lecturer were very different from the kinds of freedoms I enjoy as a private citizen. So let's take an example of, let's say, for instance, I wanted to campaign to strip gay people of the right to get married in this country. let's say that's something which I felt really strongly about. I, as a private citizen, should have the right to express that as a political opinion, the right to organize on that basis if I so want to. It's a horrendous point of view. It is not one which I think should be socially tolerated in society, but I should have the legal right to speak out on it and to organize on that if I so wish. However, if I'm then teaching in a university context and I'm saying, look, my campaigning to strip the right to marry from gay people has absolutely zero impact on my teaching. Whether or not I have, gay people in my seminars, you should just, in the interest of academic freedom, you have to leave me alone. I think that's where we go, well, no. There are some responsibilities you have in particular roles which are impacted by your speech acts outside of that context. Now, again, this is socially negotiated. This isn't something where I think you can go and here are the hard and fast rules. But the reason why I bring up that example is the framing of the Kathleen Stock stuff that's going on in Sussex is, I think, something which only sees freedom of speech as belonging to the person who's already in power. Now, I think the students have the right to politically organize, to question who it is that's employed at their university, because that is also a free expression right. And so it's something which I think is really important, which is we tend to look at this question from the person who's already in power. We tend not to think very much about the way in which different rights conflict, perhaps with different obligations and responsibilities that we have voluntarily entered into. And that this isn't something which I think can be neatly swept away by one absolute or the other, but you actually have to get stuck in and think these things through critically, rigorously, and seriously.
I mean, I think we're in danger of getting sidelined here because this is an issue about corporate power fundamentally. I do disagree with you there. I think a lecturer in any subject, if they're against gay marriage, as long as they're not harassing gay people in their class, that's fine. I'm a gay guy. I'm happy to get taught by someone who's a fundamentalist Christian who's got really interesting views about political economy, but doesn't want me to marry people.
Outside of the classroom. Who's campaigning on that basis outside of the classroom?
Yeah, I think I'd be fine with that. Yeah, if they feel strongly about it. If they kept bringing it up in class, if I were the head teacher of that university, I'd say please keep this campaign off campus. But I think people have a right to their decision. I think you do need to make it about what happens in that workplace. Unless you're talking about a Nazi or something like that. But I do worry about saying because you've got these opinions and practices outside of the workplace, you shouldn't be in the workplace. And I think it's also fair enough to tell people sometimes.
Maybe we should do an entirely separate live stream on this, but I don't think that's quite what I said. That's not quite what I said. I'm not saying that there should be a blanket rule, but I think that we should look at those things and where they conflict quite seriously. Would we be saying the same thing about race? Would we be saying the same thing about race if, say, I was a physics lecturer and outside the classroom I was like, yeah, I just don't think black people should get the vote?
Well, I think black people shouldn't have the vote is much more serious than gay people shouldn't be able to get married, essentially. It's also about, it's going to be about, where the debate is at this point in time, right? But I think there are loads of people I could happily hang out with who don't want gay marriage. I don't even, even if I was someone who was getting married, it doesn't feel like a massive threat to my rights. Black people can't vote.
Is that
feels
you being a commitment
more
phobe,
significant.
Michael? I think we've strayed into other territory.
A commitment
maybe
phobe.
This is just you being
no one's going to marry me anyway.
phobe.
I don't care about these things. No, I mean, I think I think the point you raise shows that there is going to be some negotiations about where the red lines are drawn. I accept actually that even if they didn't bring up that black people shouldn't vote, I think if a lecturer is campaigning for that outside of the university, that does raise some questions. So you've successfully, I think, won the argument that this is a blurry line. Maybe we just draw the line in different places. Justin Hancock with a $5. I'm a supporter via the Novara website, thus bypassing YouTube. Very important point. We love all of these super chats. We massively appreciate it. The thing that does mean the most to us and that really allows Novara Media to grow is regular donations on our website. So that's novaramedia.com/support. MDB also says, very much related, finally signed up to send monthly donations after what happened today. I'm unemployed, so it's not a lot, but I'm a big fan. We massively appreciate that. Especially, I mean, I presume as you're unemployed, if you're in Britain, you might have been subject to that £20 universal credit cut. This is not a good country to be unemployed in. Our unemployment benefits are, I think, one of the worst in the OECD, in the rich world, if you look at it in terms of comparing it to what prior incomes were. Terrible system. So thank you very much. Juanita Osen says, this censorship of your platform is alarming in a media landscape skewed to the right and massive corporations. Your platform is so important for your unapologetic progressive coverage. Keep up the good work. Learning to Fly says, so glad you're all back. Did any of you notice any of the awful comments sent to Owen Jones when he posted the live video with Ash and Michael earlier today? I'm afraid I didn't. I'll have to go look at those. Was that on? I presume that was under his Twitter post. Luke Lustig Bruce, I've seen lots of channels reinstated only for YouTube to go back on themselves and uphold their original decision. How will you organise a response if that happens to you? Oh God, I thought this was over. Oh, I'm very upset to read about that. But I mean, that's definitely an eventuality we should plan for. To be honest, I think this thing of reaching out to people, getting people from across the political spectrum to say, this seems wrong. It's also worth noting that they still, it seems completely ridiculous what they did suspend us for. We're definitely not a spam account, right? I mean, I don't think we breach any of their guidelines, but that just seems completely irrelevant. Zena Walsh, it would be great to see the people viewing this converted into subscribers. Solidarity with the entire team. Can't believe I've gone a full stream without saying, if you haven't already, do subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Zena, for that suggestion, that reminder, doing Fox's job for him. The Cockerel, leftist politics is nothing without power, which means convincing as many people as possible. Without real power, it's just a talking shop. Absolutely agree. Postal Wench, take your cue from the Young Turks. Cenk is expanding over as many platforms as possible. Hopefully we will have a viable network someday. Good luck. That's quite a good point. Putting your eggs in lots of different baskets. As I say, we are going to make native Twitch content, but although as Aaron says, that's still owned by Amazon, but at least you're spreading your bets. Although they do often actually tend to cluster. So it's often the case, I think, as it was with Donald Trump, that once one person kicks you off, they all fall into line. MS, Solidarity Comrades, instead of a platform migration, I'd suggest, similar to the last comment, simply diversifying platforms. More access points to your content is only better. I feel obviously that takes time and money, so take some of mine. Thank you very much. What a lovely comment. Aaron, there's a few. Oh, let's go to some of more of these comments. Just 3 more. Glad you're back. Anyone coming up for COP26? Yes. I'll be holding the fort in London. Aaron is going up. Gary is going up. I'm not precisely sure who from our articles team are going up. I think Charlotte's going up. No, Claire's going up. Anyway, we're going to be making absolutely great content there. And going meant for, you should publish on Odyssey. You can sync your current YouTube content over there in a few clicks. It's decentralized too. Interesting. We should check that out. And Sab Gelmar with £2. Thank you so much. Solidarity with Novara. Bet Fox freaked out. Fox did freak out. To be fair, everyone freaked out. I think Fox are very, very hardworking, exceptionally talented Tisky Sour producer. He keeps his eye, owl-like focused on our YouTube stats. So there was probably presumably just a massive hole in your morning, wasn't there, Fox? He says yes. Aaron, I suppose a loose question. Anything you want to add in terms of what we've been discussing already? But also, what would you say your big takeaways from today? What have you learned today? What do you feel about Novara media and the media in general and big tech that you hadn't realized yesterday?
Well, I think that the conversations you were just briefly having with Ash, hugely interesting. And I think it's important to say that just because people disagree over certain examples doesn't mean that they disagree over the big principles, which I think is inevitable. I don't think any two people are going to agree on every single example in terms of how to deal with these things. But I think the conversation around free speech for individuals and media freedom in a world of platforms and monopolies are quite different. So you could have a school where somebody has an opinion, who is a teacher. And I agree with you, Mike. If they're a private opinion and they keep them to themselves, I think there has to be a very high threshold to say you can't work here. I think black people not being able to vote, I think it meets that. But I think it has to be quite a high threshold. But at least the person who then loses their job, if they're told, look, your beliefs aren't congruent with the beliefs of this institution, sorry, you have to go, that person can go and work elsewhere. They can find an institution which is congruent with their values. The problem we have with media freedom in a world of monopolies is that if you're not on YouTube and Facebook or Amazon, then you're nowhere. When I say Amazon, I mean Twitch, of course. You're nowhere. You simply can't insert yourself in the conversation about how we should run society, how we should do things. You can't have opinions at scale, which obviously for journalism is killer. So I think they're two quite distinct things, and they're both hugely important. And I think the cancel culture stuff relates to the freedom of expression stuff for individuals. I think it's quite different for the media. And I think what happened today, Michael, is just seeing that happen, seeing the whole channel go. I never thought that would happen. I thought, you might get a video demonetized, there's misunderstandings. Seeing the whole channel go, I just thought, wow, these people have such extraordinary, arbitrary power. And we have to do something about it. And of course, it's a happy ending for Novara Media, we think, so far. But that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. And it's us today. But I think for journalists out there, I think one of the reasons why we got so much support is they recognize that if Novara Media is banned from YouTube, they could be as well. By which I mean sort of more mainstream legacy organizations. This is a serious, serious issue, and I think we all have to stand up to it. And that's why there was such widespread support in response, I think, actually, except from some sections of the Labour right, for understandable reasons.
I like that. For understandable reasons. That's very understanding of you, Aaron. Ash, I've got the same question for you. What have you learned today? What do you think today about the tech giants, the media that you weren't already thinking yesterday?
Oh, I think that what this did was really ram home just how precarious all of our grasp is on being able to access the public sphere. Because when that interaction with the public sphere is mediated by a private corporation, you are essentially in an incredibly disempowered relationship, and that can't change until you address this question of ownership. If our only way to access each other, our only way for us to access a mass audience is through unaccountable corporations, billionaire interests, well, I don't think that we can truly say that we live in a democracy. And so that's what was really rammed home for me today. The other thing is that stuff will always kick off when I'm in a yoga class. This always happens. And then I check my phone, the Novara Slack is going mad, Gary's having kittens, and I just think, you know what, this isn't very zen. Put me back in Shavasana. That's where I want to be.
I'm going to concur with what you and Aaron have said, but take a slightly different angle, which is what I have thought about, learned today that I didn't know yesterday, was quite how broad the support and recognition for Novara Media is, and quite how quickly everyone would run to our defence. And I think we've seen today how important that is. Yes, these are unaccountable, giant tech organisations. We don't really have any proper recourse if they make an unjust decision, but they do apparently respond to social pressure, and we really managed, because of all of your support, because of all the people who watch this show and tweet about us and follow us on Twitter and Insta, to I think make a real noise. And it seems to me, it was very quick. Actually, I thought we were going to be down for quite a lot longer than this. Obviously, in the back of my mind, there was this small fear that maybe the whole thing's gone. We're going to be down forever. I thought most likely we'd get reinstated in a couple of days' time. But the fact that it happened so quickly and hasn't disrupted our output that much. There's a couple of clips we would have put out this morning. We'll move on. We'll do Tisky Sour tomorrow at 7 p.m. as ever on a Wednesday night. And I think that's because of all of you guys, and also the people who aren't fans of Novara but who recognise that what we do is legitimate, valuable journalism, and it shouldn't be squashed out by a bureaucrat in the office of some Silicon Valley tech company. For now, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We are going to wrap up there. As I say, thanks again for everyone who's given us so much support today. As ever, if you support us financially already, thank you so much. If not, we value regular donors so much. If you go to novaramedia.com/support, you can donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Thank you for all of your super chats tonight. We really appreciate it. Really, really uplifting after a stressful day. Aaron Bastani, I'm so glad we still get to talk to each other on YouTube. That was my main worry.
Can you imagine? We would have had to go to Instagram Live.
The same to you, Ash. You know, my Monday mornings, what would they be without chatting to you on a YouTube channel?
They'd have been diminished. They'd have been diminished so much. But you know what, Aaron? I want you to become an Insta girl. You know, get your contouring done, your highlighting done. Maybe you could be, you know, somebody who unboxes stuff for a living.
You know what? My final word is.
I mean, that sounds easy.
In the interests of diversifying, if you already subscribe to us on YouTube, why don't you consider following us on Instagram, following us on Twitter, liking our page on Facebook, and following our page on Twitch. Tomorrow we have an Instagram Live. I think that's YouTube because I'm not involved. Is that YouTube?
Yeah, we do. So tomorrow evening, Aaron and me will be talking about Squid Game. What it says about capitalism, and also maybe this broader genre of sci-fi speculative fiction, which is holding up a mirror to the most barbarous and cruel aspects of our economy. So branching out a bit from Squid Game, having a little look at Black Mirror, maybe having a chat about Parasite as well. Follow us on the Novara Media Instagram. We will be going live tomorrow evening, and make sure you bring your green tracksuit. That's mandatory.
Incredible. I'll have to watch that back. I won't be able to watch that live because I'll be preparing as ever for Tysky Sour at 7 p.m. tomorrow. So check out our Instagram Live at 5, our YouTube channel if it's still there at 7 p.m. Thank you for all of your support. Sorry, we're back. We're happy to be back. You've been watching Novara Media. Good evening.